This is We the People with Forrest Wilson.
We the people. We the people tell the government what to do. It doesn't tell us. We the people are the driver. The government is the car. And we decide where it should go and by what route and how fast.
Somewhere over the rainbow.
This is We the People with Forrest Wilson. And now, here is Forrest Wilson.
And welcome once again to the Resistance with your citizen newsman and editor, Forrest Wilson. Happy Saturday. I really hope you're having a great weekend. And thanks for tuning in. I'm going to give you our call-in number, and the lines are open. It's 904-222-TALK, 904-222-TALK. That's 8255, 904-222-8255. Last Saturday, when we were privileged to be together, I said to you that we're already socialists, and the infrastructure is largely already in place or being constructed. And many examples abound. Here's a couple of them. There are now more federal agencies than representation of the people in Washington, each with rule-making authority through the Federal Register. 535 agencies versus 435 representatives of the people, otherwise known as congressmen. Socialized medicine. Oh, they're working overtime on this construct of socialism. Consider this. Hidden in the Affordable Care Act is the provision to subsidize insurers against losses and to ensure profitability of the insurers. That's on your tab they're constructing, my dear comrade. That's your money. We've turned the entire system into a system of common ownership, and the means of production are health care through the enforcement of taxation in the IRS. How about price controls? How about price controls on the product of labor, otherwise known as the minimum wage? And they're wanting to raise that as we speak, because somehow it's unfair for the American worker to work for the quote-unquote minimum wage. I've got an idea. Let's just get rid of it altogether. Welfare, food stamps, and public assistance, Social Security, and entitlements. Did you know in 33 states, welfare pays more than an $8 an hour job? By the way, $8 is higher than the minimum wage. 33 states. That's over half the country. In 12 states in the District of Columbia, the welfare package is more generous than a $15 an hour job. According to the Census Bureau, 49% of Americans receive benefits from one or more government programs. I mean, if we're not socialists, we're awfully damn close. The federal government owns roughly 28% of the 2.27 billion acres of land in the United States. 28%. If you're just waking up, you really need to look at the size and scope of the federal government. And I did say federal, not federal. It is truly out of control and poses the greatest threat to our freedom and liberty. These Washington morons are spinning us into oblivion. We just rack up debt on debt. If you don't believe me, go to the debt clock. That's your bill. We're literally getting hooker quality at escort prices. It ought to be the other way around. I've got a guest today, John F. McManus. He's president of the John Birch Society, and Jack is waving at me that he doesn't have him on the line. Jack, would you get John on the line?
No answer.
No answer. Oh, goodness. Well, in any event, we'll have John F. McManus here for you shortly. Jack, will you track him down? Anyways, he's the president of the John Birch Society and the publisher of The New American. But while we're waiting for John, I want to continue on with something else that we were talking about last weekend. And that's the plight of Sergeant Andrew Tomoresi. He's the Iraq war vet who was arrested after border inspectors found 3 legally purchased and registered firearms in his truck. Though he claims he made a wrong turn at a poorly marked crossing, he was taken to a prison in Tecate, Mexico, and sits there today. Now, I'm just getting breaking news that apparently they've released this Sergeant Bo Brigdahl, the Taliban, and Afghanistan released him from captivity in exchange for 5 Afghan detainees from the U.S. prison in Guantanamo. Well, there you go, 5 for 1. And you know, I'm glad Bergdahl is coming home. He'll return peacefully to his community and his family, whereas the 5 terrorists that they release will return to the battlefield. In any event, do you have any idea how we treat illegal aliens, undocumented Democrats who have weapons violations in this country? I bet you've never heard of what's really going on. Apparently, we release them. According to Jessica M. Vaughn, she's the director of policy studies at the Center for Immigration Studies. In 2013, you probably heard about this, ICE freed 36,000 convicted criminal aliens from detention who were awaiting deportation proceedings. Now, it seems to me that I remember our president assuring us that the resources of the federal government, agencies charged with enforcement of immigration law, were deporting the criminal element. Well, they did deport them to communities all across America, 36,000 of them, but that's really not the whole story. According to Ms. Vaughn, the report documents releases of 68,000 cases of criminal aliens that were encountered by ICE officers in 2013. In a report called Catch and Release, they document 68,000 criminal aliens convicted of criminal crimes were released after being tried and convicted. The 36,000 were slated to be deported. The 68,000 additional criminal aliens that had already been prosecuted were simply released back into the community. Now, let me help you get this. In addition to the 36,000, 68,000 additional criminal aliens were released, with the convictions ranging from traffic offenses to homicide. Of that group, the 68,000, 1,724 were charged and convicted with weapon offenses, the same or similar charges that Sergeant Tomorisi is getting in Mexico. Now, this is a confounding result. One of America's soldiers sits in a Mexican prison on weapon offenses, while our Injustice Department, led by this mental midget Eric Holder, releases back to us 1,724 undocumented immigrants, undocumented Democrats, convicted of weapons offenses. I can't even comprehend this. Why do we tolerate this behavior from our employees? Where are our representatives? Were you even aware of 68,000 additional undocumented Democrats released by this inept administration? I bet you'd never heard of it. And all they can talk about is our fat kids and the dangers of concussion while playing football. These people are simply brain damaged. Look, this is the equivalent of hooker quality at escort prices. That's what we're getting with this government. You probably have never heard this either, but Plato said one of the penalties for refusing to participate in politics is that you end up being governed by your inferiors. But, you know, I guess that's racist for me to call them inferior. Plato lived 400 years before Jesus Christ, so this has been out there for some time. Look, the media, the bureaucrats, the politicians, they're complicit in this disaster of an administration. Can't we find, out of 300 million Americans, citizen legislators to seek congressional office? Why do we continually reelect the same old retread incumbents at a rate of about 90%? In other words, 90% of incumbents are reelected every 2 to 6 years. It's time for America to act. And I mean at the ballot box, because after that, the only thing you're going to have left is the ammo box. Now, I wrote my congressman about Sergeant Andrew Tomoresi and encourage you to do the same. And when I get a reply, I'll be happy to read it right here on this broadcast. Our federal government should demand the immediate release of Tomoresi. And that's about all they can do, because unlike Bergdahl, they've already released the 1,724 illegal aliens convicted of weapons offenses. So it's not like we can have a prisoner swap. So I believe we're overpaying for a federal government that is incompetent and ineffective on the surface and dangerous to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness throughout. Well, have we got our guests, Jack? Or are you still tracking them down?
Call his number a half dozen times. All we get is his answering machine.
Well, leave him a message.
Yep, did every time.
All right.
And you know what? I noticed he's in Wisconsin. I hope he doesn't get our time change differences. Eastern and Central time.
Yeah,
could happen. Clear. Unfortunately.
All right. Well, we'll continue. I wanted to say something about the VA and this Shinseki resignation, the head of the VA. I'm glad Shinseki resigned, but truly he should have been fired. A leader would have fired him. I seriously doubt the community organizer in chief has ever fired anyone. I mean, really, can you name anybody that this guy's fired? And do you know what Obama had to say following Shinseki's resignation? And this came off of NPR. Obama said that because of record-keeping issues, the VA's problems had been obscured from his administration and Shinseki for a long time. I mean, really? He goes on. He apparently claims to have learned about the VA problems through the news media. I mean, we've had at least 40 veterans die as a result of a delay in treatment. And there is a solution. If you took all the vets waiting on these lists, now that we know about them, and you gave them a voucher for care at a doctor of their choice, if you can still do that, outside of the VA, until this threat to veterans can be eliminated. In other words, until we can fix the VA, but I'm not sure it can be fixed. I mean, what else can you say? This is another reason why we do not want the federal government in charge of our health care. And if you don't think there'll be waiting lines when ACA finally gets fully implemented, which probably won't start until after the midterm elections, well then, my friends, you're destined for a waiting list somewhere. I'll be back after this break, and we'll move on to another story that'll absolutely blow your mind. You're listening to Forrest Wilson, The Resistance. Our lines are open, 904-222-TALK, 904-222-8255. Stay tuned.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
Okay, and we're back. I want to mention our website. It's www.wethepeople1787.org. It's www.wethepeople1787.org. You can go there and listen to old shows and get some information about some of the things that we talk about here on air. Also want to mention Cam Anderson, State Farm agent. Like a good neighbor, Cam Anderson is there. Cam is also doing refinance mortgages. You can reach Cam at 904-381-1206, 904-381-1206. Cam Anderson, like a good neighbor. Cam is there. So I want to go back and relate a story to you that you probably have never heard, but I will begin January 25th, 1993. I was driving to work, and this is really a harbinger of terror, this story that I'm going to tell you. I was traveling on Route 123 in Washington, just outside of Washington, D.C., in McLean, Virginia, on that morning. The night before, I'd been in Saudi Arabia working with a group called the Special Activities Division of the CIA on an operation called Southern Watch. and our mission was to enforce the no-fly zone over Iraq at the end of the first Gulf War. So I pull up into the traffic there, one light behind the light, which is the main entrance into the CIA facility. And it's Great Falls Road. So I was sitting at the light at Great Falls Road, and about a block and a half up was the light to enter into the agency compound. So I'm sitting there and waiting for the light to change so I could move forward. And by the way, this is my first day at CIA headquarters. I'd never worked there before. I'd always worked at agencies or different facilities scattered around the Washington, D.C. location, Washington, D.C. area, covert locations. So I'm sitting there, and the traffic literally just stops moving. And I'm probably 3 cars back from this particular light, block and a half away from the entrance to the agency compound. Now, I had, on my route that morning, I'd pulled over because my badge was in my briefcase, and I knew I had to show it when I drove through the gate. And, you basically hold up your badge. Back then, you held up your badge, and they wave you through the gate. So that couple of minutes had put me at this particular traffic light, that couple of minutes that I'd pulled over. And all of a sudden, there's police cars going the wrong direction on the other side of the road, just at a high rate of speed, sirens blaring. I mean, it was like all hell broke loose. And this was just very sudden. So a cop pulls into the intersection, and he waves the couple of cars down Great Falls Road. Well, at the back of the agency, they had an entrance, so I went through that entrance, showed my badge, and parked my car, and found my way into the new headquarters building there, and got to my desk and sat down. I was kind of getting oriented to my new position there at the headquarters compound. And I get a call from my new secretary. Her name was Tammy, and Tammy says to me that there'd been a shooter out in front of the agency at the main entrance that morning. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning when all this went down. So I'm talking to her on the phone, and she's giving me the lowdown. Well, what happened was a shooter, Mir Amal-Khanzi, had opened fire on the cars waiting to enter the compound. Khanzi was a Pakistani national. Now, this was January 25th, 1993, so it was some time ago. But he was here on a falsified visa, just like the 9/11 hijackers. And apparently he was distraught by the U.S. government and some of the activities that we were conducting, namely the Gulf War at the time. When they finally caught this guy and an FBI agent interrogated him, he testified at Khanzi's trial that Khanzi confessed he wanted to punish the U.S. government for bombing Iraq and for what he saw as its involvement in the killing of Palestinians, and because the CIA was too deeply involved in the internal affairs of Muslim countries. Now, I want to take you into the automobile through the testimony of one of the survivors of this vicious attack. And the automobile was none other than that of Frank and Judy Darling. Judy Darling testified in Khanzi's trial that she and her husband, Frank Darling, were driving to work, and all of a sudden she heard glass smash behind me. My husband looked in the rearview mirror and said right away, "My God, I've been shot. Get down." Judy Becker Darling said she ducked beneath the dashboard as her husband struggled to maneuver their Volkswagen Jetta out of harm's way. She continued to hear what sounded like balloons popping. Now, this is in sworn testimony. "I picked up my head and I was looking down the barrel of a gun. My husband said again, 'Get down.' She obeyed and heard more shots. When I picked my head up, Frank was shot in the head." Judy Darling told the jury she couldn't eat, sleep, or function normally for several years after Frank was killed. "I just kept telling my parents I could smell blood and death. I just didn't want to be here anymore. I wanted to be with him." Mir Amal-Khanzi was executed on November 14, 2002 by lethal injection after hiding out in and around the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan for 4 years. This was during the time that we know the Taliban had taken hold, and none other than Osama bin Laden was leading an element of Al-Qaeda that would eventually attack the World Trade Center. He was captured and taken from a hotel room in Pakistan by 4 FBI agents on June 15, 1997. During interrogation in his trial, he admitted to shooting and killing Frank Darling, Covert Operations, CIA, Dr. Lansing Bennett, CIA analyst, and wounding Nicholas Starr, Calvin Morgan, and Stephen Williams. Now, this story really is the story of the first domestic terrorist attack. And in a written statement, Kanzi confirmed purchasing an AK-47 rifle and 150 rounds several days prior to the shooting. Now, this is someone who entered this country illegally on a falsified visa and managed to purchase an AK-47 and 150 rounds. He said he drove his pickup truck to the scene, got out of my vehicle, and started shooting into vehicles stopped at the red light. Well, I was at the light behind him about a block and a half away. He goes on, I shot approximately 10 rounds, shooting 5 people. When he was asked why he stopped shooting, he said there wasn't anybody left to shoot. Well, you may ask, what about Judy Darling? Well, apparently, the reason that he didn't shoot Judy was he claimed that shooting females was against his Muslim faith. And why do you think he selected the CIA? I'll tell you when we return. It'll absolutely knock your socks off. You're listening to The Resistance, Forrest Wilson. Lines are open, 904-222-TALK, 904-8255. I'll be right back.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
And we're back. Forrest Wilson. I was just relating the story of the January 25th, 1993 terrorist attack in front of CIA headquarters. I literally was sitting at the traffic light behind the shooter, about a block and a half away. And I was just struck at what happened and struck by some of the things that this man said after he was apprehended 4 years later. And before the break, I teased you with why he selected the CIA. In sworn testimony, he says, several days before the shooting, I decided to do the shooting at the CIA or the Israeli embassy, but decided to shoot at the CIA because it was easier because the CIA officials were not armed. And you recall Judy Darling, the woman in the car with Frank Darling, her husband, newly married, who was executed right in front of her. The only reason she escaped, according to Kanzi, is he only shot males because it would be against his religion to shoot females. Well, for me, that event impacted me well beyond a phone call from my secretary, Tammy. Because Frank Darling was a close friend and colleague. And, you know, before I'd left for the Gulf, he beamed that he'd introduce me to his bride when he returned from the Gulf. And if I'd been at the light, I didn't have a weapon either, so I would have been part of that group of casualties. But this is more than a random act of violence. This was a harbinger of terrorism to come. It was the first domestic terrorist attack and preceded the February 26, 1993 World Trade Center bombings by 32 days. And I often wonder how Judy Darling is doing. I never met her. I didn't go to the funeral due to my covert status with the agency. And I'll forever miss Frank Darling. So, with our federal government endlessly debating amnesty while our border remains open, you have to ask the question, how many Miramal Kanzis walk among us? You know, the guy had a master's degree in English and he could easily blend in. But the debate centers on the Mexican and their desire to be here. There's the DREAM Act, there's food stamps, there's endless support and programs to welcome the illegal to our country. And Jeb Bush, of all people, says their entry in violation of our law is an act of love. Are we no longer concerned with terrorism? And I bet you never heard the story of Miramal Kansi. I'll never forget it. And to this day, I have a weapon within reach wherever I am, especially my car. The lines are open, 904-222-TALK, 904-222-TALK. That's 904-222-8255. And Jack, you've tracked down John F. McManus. Now, if you'll just show me how to get him in, you know, they're in the process of putting together a new studio here. And I kind of entered at the time when this studio was being constructed. But my guest today is John F. McManus, president of the John Birch Society and publisher of The New American.
And since you're former CIA, we do have a button on the phone. If you push it, you get to blow up a small country. And it's the one that's blinking. Push it, the button to the right.
Okay,
I just learned that today.
John, are you there?
I'm here.
Hello, welcome to the show, John.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, briefly, give the listeners an overview of the John Birch Society.
Lots of times things happen and somebody will comment and say, somebody ought to do something. Well, in 1958, a man named Robert Welch decided to do something, and the something he decided was an educational effort to reach the American people with the wonders of our own country and its enemies, foreign and domestic. John Birch Society is an educational organization. We publish books. We have a magazine, as you just mentioned. We used to do videos, and now we do DVDs and all that kind of thing. We have a speakers bureau. And what we say is that the government of the United States is way beyond the boundaries set by the Constitution. In fact, we can sum it up by saying America became great not because of what government did, but because of what government was prevented from doing by the Constitution. And we got to get back to that.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and I have been telling our listeners that if we're not socialists, we're awfully close.
That's
Do you
right.
believe that we're socialists today?
You got it. The United States is becoming the new USSR, the United States of Socialism Republic. You know.
There's plenty of evidence of it all around us, and I love the arguments and the labels that people attach to the pundits. Oh, they're left, they're right, they're this, they're that. Tell me, what is your thoughts on the labeling of certain Americans that speak out?
Well, it's to be expected. You know, once the God-man walked amongst us, and look what they did to him. So we should not expect any better treatment. We're fortunate we don't get the same treatment that he got. But it's a long-standing tactic to attach nasty adjectives to people when you don't agree with them. We don't do that. We deal in facts. We deal in history. We deal in spoken word and so on. And we would like everybody else to do the same thing. But we know that the John Birch Society has been called practically every nasty adjective you can come up with. And yet we've survived. And I think that a lot of the nastiness directed toward us has driven people to take a look at us. And
if someone wanted to look into the John Birch Society, what's your website address?
Just jbs.org, jbs.org.
And I certainly would encourage the listeners to go check out the John Birch Society. Well, with 530 federal agencies and national debt well over $17.5 trillion, what are some solutions, John?
The overall solution is to get back to the Constitution. If you did, you would see that the federal government would no longer be involved in education and housing. We wouldn't have foreign adventures without a declaration of war. the government of the United States would shrink to 20% its size and 20% its cost, and that would be certainly a delight. So we have programs to instruct the people about the Constitution, what it is, what it means, what it really says, and go back into the history of our country. We are also what you might call originalists. We believe that the Constitution is, as written, should be adhered to according to the time when the law was written and the understanding of the words at the time. If there's a need to change anything, then fine, amend the Constitution. But don't just assume and don't just ignore it.
Well, are these scandals that we see breaking out, like the VA with the killer waiting list, the IRS targeting conservative groups, the Department of State and the Benghazi debacle, I mean, are these symptoms of a government out of control?
Well, not only are they symptoms of a government out of control, the response when the problem is shown is to me more a symptom of the out of controlness. For instance, you've got the VA scandal, the Veterans Administration, and the hospitals and so on. If that isn't a reason to stay away from Obamacare, I don't know what is.
Yes. These lists apparently are very similar to death panels.
Right. Now, I was just doing a little research before we connected here about Benghazi. It was only a couple of weeks after the Benghazi attack and the loss of 4 Americans in that I wrote a piece, and I have not seen anybody else refer to the same kind of information that I was writing about. So let me just briefly tell you about it. What I saw happen was that Ambassador Stevens had left his post in Tripoli, which is on the west side of Libya, and go all the way over to Benghazi, way on the east side of Libya, and meet with the Turkish ambassador or a Turkish counterpart. And the purpose of the meeting was to arrange to get weapons delivered into Turkey and then into Syria, into one of the factions opposing Assad. Well, what happened is that one of the factions found out that these weapons were going to the other faction. They didn't like the idea of that, and so they attacked the American forces there, the American diplomats and so forth, and they ended up killing 4 of them. Now, you'll hear Hillary Clinton say, I'll take full responsibility for what happened in Benghazi. And then she'll dicker around this and dicker around. Nobody's talking about why Stevens, the ambassador, was in Benghazi, which is what I did.
And, when this attack happened, and part of this has to do with the technology available to the agency and the various agencies of the federal government, specifically the CIA, I believe that they may have some evidence that is incriminating for Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to get into that.
It incriminates them.
Yes, and I want to get into that when we return from break. John, can you hold on for a few minutes?
Sure, I'll be right here.
We're talking with John McManus. He's the president of the John Birch Society, and we'll be right back. Our lines are open, 222-TALK, 904-222-TALK. You're listening to Forrest Wilson on The Resistance.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here is Forrest.
And we're back. Forrest Wilson, The Resistance. My guest today is John McManus, president of the John Birch Society and publisher of The New American. John, we were talking about Benghazi and the arming of these rebel factions against Bashir al-Assad. And apparently some of the factions in the Libyan uprising became upset with us arming, Ambassador Stevens being involved in the arming of the rebels in Syria, correct?
Well, it might not have been the Libyans that were as upset about it, but there were Libyans who certainly carried out the act. There are at least 3 factions in Syria trying to unseat Assad. So if the United States decides to help one of them covertly and the other finds out about it, then the other is not going to like that and they're going to take action. That's exactly what happened.
And is it possible that the group that took action is a group that was armed previously by the United States government?
Yes, quite.
And you know where I'm going with this, with the CIA. Now, and to put it in perspective, in 1992, I had the equivalent of Google Earth on a laptop with no connection. In other words, I was sitting in the middle of the desert, basically with a suitcase, a computer, a directional antenna, and a transceiver. And I had the equivalent of Google Earth, long before anybody knew what that was, to where I could produce pictures of the battlefield for the Joint Command. And the only point I'm making, John, is that back then, the government was a good 15 to 20 years ahead of any technology that was available to the American public or known about. So is it possible that during that attack, photographs were taken or imagery or video of the attackers, and they turned out to be people that we had armed previously?
It's quite possible. In fact, I think it's likely. But I don't have any evidence in that regard. Well,
that's what's so suspicious about it, because if you arm terrorists and they commit a terrorist act, that's a federal crime.
It should be.
It is.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a federal crime to be sending weapons into something like what's going on in Syria. That's breaking a law right there.
Well, and I don't understand how they justify these activities. But
well, they don't bother justifying it because they just cover everything up.
And hence
there's all kinds of comment about Benghazi. Oh, who's to blame? Who's to this? Nobody wants to talk about why Stevens was there and what he was doing when he was there.
Right.
I hope this comes out in the congressional investigations that they promise.
Well, they got to investigate Hillary Clinton. They've got, what's his name, the new head of Department of State, John Kerry.
John Kerry.
I mean, what does John Kerry know about what happened in Benghazi?
Oh, John Kerry would tell you he knows about everything.
I believe it.
Yeah. But John Kerry, that he would become Secretary of State after his disgraceful attitude as a lieutenant in the United States military. It's incredible. I've written on that as well. But anyhow, you may recall that right after the attack on Benghazi, they started blaming it on a home video made in California that was not.
I've seen the video.
You've seen the video.
Yes, to me. It wasn't,
isn't it?
Well, it really portrayed Muhammad in a favorable light. I didn't find it offensive at all. Of course, I'm not Muslim, but
well, the point that I want to make is that they immediately had an excuse ready, which meant that they were covering up right from the beginning. You can't tell me that Hillary Clinton didn't know why Stevens was in Benghazi.
Yes,
she knew. And so when the thing went awry, then she had to have some sort of excuse. So she will not talk about why he was there. She will say, I take full responsibility. I'm therefore a very good candidate for the presidency of the United States because I'm willing to accept responsibility.
And John, the liberals will elect her because she's a woman. They'll look the other way. They have no concept of what happened in Benghazi, or for that matter.
I'm sure she's going to be elected. I just
say that one more time. You're sure she's going to be elected?
I can't be sure. No, I'm not sure that she'll be elected. I I tend to think that there's going to be a lot happen between now and 2016 that would make it fairly improbable that she would be elected.
Well, I certainly hope you're right. One of the things that they've got to do is they've got to interrogate Hillary Clinton and some of the other people that were on the ground that day when the attack on Benghazi happened.
Well, that would be good.
Yes.
You know, sometimes the people that are doing the investigating are not even themselves willing to ask the tough questions or aware enough to even know what the question should be.
Well, with all of this and all of the things that you've pointed out, what are some solutions? What are practical solutions for the listeners? Because I talk to a lot of people and they say, look, I'm one person. What can I do? Well, Barack Obama is one person, and look what he's done.
Oh, yeah. Look who's behind him, though. Look what propelled him into where he is. The man who that incident with Jeremiah Wright should have been enough to end his candidacy, but it didn't. You know, what can one person do? Well, what we do in the Birch Society, we educate ourselves, and then we educate others. We wake the town and tell the people. We get behind opposing different things that the government is trying to accomplish, and also get behind things that we would like to see happen. So I could go over a long list of successes that we've had that are small in comparison to what everybody wants. Everybody wants a quick fix, but you're not going to get a quick fix. But the fact that there have been successes in the Birch Society means that the program is correct, and that other people should take a good hard look at it and then get involved in helping more successes to happen.
Well, and I think one of the fears is, and I know I've experienced this, is depending upon your level of involvement, you may get an audit.
That's right. That's right. You may get an audit, right? We've read that some of the conservative organizations have been targeted by the IRS and so on. Just to show you that the John Birch Society has a lot of good thinking involved in its founding and so forth. When the society was formed in December of 1958, the man who formed it, a man named Robert Welch, decided that we were not going to ask the government for tax-exempt status. We are not going to serve at the pleasure of the United States government. If we are successful, as I expect we will be, and we had the tax exemption, we would have it removed, and it would probably kill our organization. So we're not going to function at the pleasure of the United States government.
So you're for profit and you pay taxes. We
pay taxes when we have a profit. We've never had a profit, but we don't it makes it difficult.
Have you had an audit?
It makes it difficult for us to raise funds because if you give a contribution to the John Birch Society, it's not deductible for you on your own taxation.
Well, John, we've got about 2 minutes left. So my question was, have you ever had an audit or any type of intimidation from the federal government?
No, we haven't. No, the tactic against the Birch Society was to smear. It didn't take, so then the tactic said, okay, let's ignore. We sit around sometimes saying, how can we get attacked? We'd like to get attacked again. It was helping us.
Oh, that's great. Well, John, listen, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. John McManus, the president of the John Birch Society and the New American Magazine. Before you go, give them your website again and where they can get a copy of the New American.
Just go to jbs.org and you can link there to the New American Magazine, which is every other week we publish the magazine. And you can send away and ask for a free sample. I think they'll send it to you.
Wonderful. John, thanks so much.
Let's do it again sometime.
We shall. Forrest Wilson with The Resistance. I hope you have a great weekend. I'll look forward to seeing you next weekend.